So, what's the best experience of hospitality you have ever had? How did it make you feel? Me and my family are big Disney fans. We go at least once a year since 2019. And I remember our first trip there, we were waiting at the bus station at the Animal Kingdom Lodge to get over to Magic Kingdom because we had breakfast reservations in the castle. My daughter Trinity's dressed up as a princess, and you guys know how it is. You're waiting at the bus station. Some people have gotten there before you, and you're worried, like, are we going to get on this bus? And so all the parents are kind of jockeying for position while being as polite as possible. Well, the bus comes, and the bus driver comes off, and people start trying to board. Well, he tells them to wait for a few seconds, and then he goes back on the bus. He brings out a small broom and starts sweeping off the entrance of the bus. Then he gets a towel, and he lays the towel on the floor to the entrance of the bus. And then he points at my daughter Trinity, and he says, "You get on first, princess." And that's the kind of hospitality that has made us huge Disney fans. Well, a few weeks ago, we were down there again, and I asked my same daughter Trinity, who is much older now, I was like, why do you think so many people come to places like Disney, when there are theme parks all over the world and Disney's the most expensive? Why do they spend all this money to come here? Well, first she said, because of the rides. I'm like, well, actually, if you're doing it for the rides, then other theme parks like Kings Island or Cedar Park, they have better rides that are more thrilling than Disney does. So then she mentioned a whole bunch of other things. And eventually she said, after thinking, I think it's because of how they make you feel. And that's exactly right. They focus on hospitality, whereas other places focus on the experience of the ride or something else like that. Disney focuses on making the guest feel a certain way. Now, we love hospitality because when we have experienced unusual hospitality, it makes us feel seen. It makes us feel like our needs and our desires are anticipated. And it also makes us feel known, right? Think about the best hospitality you've experienced. It's like, man, does this person knows me? You know what I mean? It's important to also consider that when it comes to our relationship with God. So a question I have for you all is, have you ever had an experience with God where you could say that God walked away feeling seen, feeling like his desires of you were anticipated and met, and feeling known by you? Well, today I want to look at two stories that teach us how to be hospitable to God. And maybe you haven't ever thought about being hospitable to God, because we don't really ever ask questions like, how do you think God feels? But in these two stories, the most famous one is the Mary and Martha story from Luke chapter 10. But I want to couple that with the story of Genesis being visited by God in the form of three strangers in Genesis chapter 18. Because I think that Genesis passage will help us properly interpret the Mary and Martha passage, which is often misinterpreted. So in the Genesis passage, God comes to Abraham. Three people come to his tent. And as soon as Abraham sees him, he immediately stops what he's doing and he runs towards these three people and bows down before them. So just real quick, one of the things that Abraham teaches us is how to be responsive to God. Whenever we sense that God is present or God is active, it's not one of those things where we get around to it. But Abraham stops what he's doing and immediately runs over to be attentive to God, and he worships God. And that's really our posture that we're supposed to have towards God. Sometimes I think, especially we Westerners, we have such a casual approach to our faith. We wear shirts like Jesus is my homeboy and things like that. And I get it. It's all in good fun. And we don't want to lean into a direction where God is cruel or vindictive and we have to approach him as if he's a cruel taskmaster. But there's a big difference between the kind of approach we have towards God that's more along the lines of what Abraham has, where he realizes that God is present and he requires my full attention, and the approach that kind of prioritizes God. Even setting God at number one. Setting God at number one isn't the same as what we see Abraham doing. What we see Abraham doing is recognizing that God is my all in all, and he deserves my full attention. The next thing I want to point out quickly is that Abraham recognizes that it's the Lord. I mean, it's just three strangers. This is a theophany that happens, but somehow Abraham recognizes that this is none other than Yahweh. And why is that significant? Well, it's significant because it shows us that Abraham has spent a lot of time in God's presence. So even though God comes in different forms, Abraham recognizes that it's the Lord. In the same way, if your significant other, or your spouse, or maybe your kids or your parent, they come home dressed in a costume, it's not going to take you long before you recognize who that person is. You're going to know them. Why? Because their gait when they walk is going to be familiar to you. The sound of their voice will be familiar to you. In other words, there's certain aspects of who they are that a disguise can't hide. And the same is true for Abraham. Even though God comes clothed, as it were, in a different form, Abraham recognizes him because Abraham has spent a lot of time in God's presence. And so that's the second thing for us. To offer great hospitality, we have to spend a lot of time in the presence of the one that we're serving so that we can anticipate their needs and we can anticipate their desires and we can serve them properly. The next thing we see is busyness. Abraham runs off immediately and gets busy. He asks his wife Sarah to make some cake, but he asks her to make it of the choicest flour. So he's giving God his best. And then he runs to get a calf, but not just any calf, but he runs and get a calf that is, it says in verse 7, a tender and good one. Again, he's giving God his best. He's busy at work to serve the Lord. All of his attention is focused on God, and so he busily prepares himself to give God his best. And then the last thing we see is once the food is prepared, he takes it to the Lord, to these three guests that come to him. And then listen to what it says in verse 8. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So he serves them, and he doesn't sit down with them and eat with them as if they're equals, but he serves them. He has this posture of readiness. I'm ready to serve. Whatever you need, I'm here for you, right? So that's what we see from Abraham about how to be hospitable to God. Now let's quickly look at the famous Mary and Martha passage, because that one is almost always misinterpreted. Many of you have probably heard pastors preach this passage suggesting that we should be more like Mary, not a Martha. And what they mean from that is Mary is attentive to Jesus. She's sitting at his feet and listening. So we should have like a contemplative approach to our spirituality that's always quiet, that's always listening, that's always learning, that's always at the feet of Jesus. And we shouldn't be like Martha, who's busy. She's preparing things. She's getting things done. She's checking off her list of things to do. But that's not a proper way of interpreting this passage. And that's why I think reading this along with the Genesis passage is very helpful. And the church was very wise to couple these things together in the lectionary. Because in the Genesis passage, what do we see of Abraham? He's extremely busy. As soon as they say you can serve us, he runs off and gets right to work, delegating responsibilities and preparing things. So he's phenomenally busy. So in fact, Martha might look at Abraham like, that's my patron saint. I want to be like Abraham. So this passage isn't suggesting that what one is doing is good and the other is bad, and we should strive to be like Mary and strive to avoid being like Martha. It's highlighting the attention that we give when we're serving God. Listen to what Martha says, because what she says really is a tell of why she gets rebuked. It says in verse 40, Luke chapter 10, verse 40, Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came and said to him, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. So in other words, Martha's essentially serving Jesus, but she's thinking about so many other things. She has a distracted mind, right? Her mind is here and there and all over the place. So as she's doing this work, she's not thinking about God. She's not thinking about Jesus. right? She's thinking about maybe Jesus is one of the things that's on her thought, but she's also thinking about so many other things. She's anxious. She's troubled. That's what this passage is highlighting. It's highlighting the kind of service that's done to God without necessarily thinking about God. And maybe you've been there before, man. I know I have as a pastor. We're in a worship service and my mind is on making sure everybody does what they're supposed to do and at the right time so that people can have a good experience, so that they'll leave and maybe they'll want to come back and maybe what's going to happen later on that week. But this passage is saying that there's a way to serve God even while being extremely busy, while keeping your focus on God. That's what Abraham did. He was launched into busyness because of God. He was focused on God. Martha was launched into busyness because of herself. She was thinking about herself. And so to just tie this all back together to hospitality and how to be hospitable to God, I think what this says is that we need to be the kind of people who, number one, are attentive to God in a worshipful way, that we're responsive to God and we give our best to God when we do serve. And in our busyness, we must stay focused on what God is doing and what God is calling us to do. That way, what Paul said in Colossians 3:17 can be true of us. Whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Wouldn't it be great if, let's say God left you a Yelp review, right? And on that Yelp review, he's like, man, the hospitality that I get from so-and-so is just amazing. I always feel seen. All my wants are anticipated, and it just seems like they really know me. Well, these two passages tell us how to do that. Give God our attention, be immediately responsive to what God is doing, and then as we're serving, keep God on the forefront of our minds. And may the Lord bless you and keep you as you seek to serve in his name this week. Peace.